what are key law that buyers and sellers have to keep in mind in the real estate transactions?
Investors from abroad assume that laws from abroad could count here, but of course we're in the Aruban jurisdiction, so the Aruban laws apply.
Are there any recent changes in environmental laws that the investors should be aware of? The zoning laws and how they impact residential use of the property, but how does it impact developers? Are there like specific clauses that a tenant or a landlord should be aware of when going into the lease agreement? Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Power of Bold Living. My name is Genesis, Executive Office Assistant at Bold Properties Aruba, and today I'm joined by beautiful Kiara Arends from Kloes, Kock Partners attorney. How are you, Kiara?
Good morning, Genesis. Thank you for the invite. As you mentioned, I work at Kloes, Kock Partners. I'm a junior associate at Kloes, Kock Partners, and I'm very happy to be here today and talk a little bit about real estate law.
Thank you for coming. Well, the first thing we want to dive in is what are key law that buyers and sellers have to keep in mind in the real estate transactions?
So real estate law in Aruba is governed by civil law, because we have a civil law system here in Aruba, and it's derived from the Dutch legal system. And one of the key aspects is the difference between property land and long leased land. With property land, you essentially become the owner of the land where you buy the property. And with long lease, it's as if you are the owner, but you're leasing from the government for around 60 years.
And what happens when the 60 years pass?
Then you have to renew it. And once you renew it, you get another 60 years.
What are the most common issues that arise in real estate transactions?
Both residents and non-residents can obtain mortgages here in Aruba, but for non-residents, it's more difficult. Usually, the rates are higher for the down payment. It can go anywhere from 40 to 60% for mortgages, and the interest rates are also higher. It's 5 to 8%.
Okay, and what should buyers and sellers be aware of when it comes to property ownership and title deeds on the island?
One key point of importance is verifying that the title deed is indeed without any outstanding claims or disputes over the property. So making sure that there are no complications with the title, that the title can be carried on easily and that the process flows.
Okay, are there like unique things that a buyer coming from the United States or Canada or Latin America or wherever you are in the world should keep in mind with the jurisdiction of Aruba that isn't similar to other places?
One key aspect that is different here in Aruba from countries and jurisdictions such as Canada and US is that the notary here plays a central role. So the notary prepares the deed of transfer and acts as a neutral party.
Okay, because to my knowledge, like in the United States, lawyers can help with this process, right? But it's not the same here.
Exactly. So that's a huge difference.
Okay.
The neutral role of the notary makes that the process goes quicker and faster because the notary is non-partial. So that's a key difference between the US and here.
Okay, thank you for explaining. Another question that we wanted to dive into was what are the regulations regarding foreign ownership of property in Aruba?
So foreigners, including non-residents, are allowed to own property in Aruba just like residents. However, as I just explained, there are some difficulties or some complications that come with living abroad. First of all, of course, knowing that the legal system is different, that can be sometimes a pitfall where investors from abroad assume that laws from abroad could count here. But of course, we're in the Aruban jurisdiction, so the Aruban laws apply.
And do you often encounter clients who come into your office because the jurisdiction of real estate law is so different here in comparison to the US or Canada, for example?
For sure, I think, and it's very important to do so as well, to, before going into an agreement, make sure you have a local attorney go through all of the paperwork and make sure that the due diligence is complied with. And because of so many differences between the U.S. legal system and the Aruban legal system.
Now that you mentioned about due diligence, what are some key components of this that buyers and sellers should be aware of throughout the real estate transaction process?
I think, first of all, like I mentioned before, the property title. I think the zoning laws are also very important to make sure that the place where you're buying property, that you're aware of what kind of zone you are buying property in, depending, of course, on what you want to do with this property. I think those are two key components that we have to be very cautious of when purchasing property here in Aruba.
For compliance, okay. And can you elaborate a little bit more about the zoning laws and the land use, like the differences?
So we have the zoning law here in Aruba, which is called the ROPV, which is the Spatial Development Plan of Aruba, and this indicates what parts of Aruba are primarily for business, for example, or what parts of Aruba are strictly for nature. And then, of course, you have different rules depending on where you're located. So, for example, if we're talking about an area which is an area of a lot of nightlife, someone who purchases property in an area like that would have to be a little bit understanding of the nuisance situation and how busy it can be, how loud it can be sometimes at night, and be able to tolerate that as well, right? So the different zones you're living in, also for example, sustainability. If you're in a nature zone, there are certain restrictions on what you can do with your property. So it's very important to take this into account before purchasing the property.
And when a person wants to build, let's say, four floors in their building, that also has to do with what you just explained, right?
Exactly, and that has to do as well with the first question that you asked me, which was the difference between the erfpacht, which is the long lease land, and the eigendomsrecht, property, which is the property land. In erfpacht, you have a lot more restrictions. When it comes to, for example, areas such as Westpunt, we have Topaz, Esmeralda, these kind of areas where you're only allowed to build houses that are one story. Again, something that's very important to take into consideration when buying property in these areas.
Kiara, can you explain the process for obtaining permits for residential or commercial construction?
The process includes an assessment of the things that I already just mentioned, the zoning laws, environmental impact, the adherence to the construction codes. And of course, before being able to build, you need a permit from the Minister of Public Works here in Aruba. So no construction can be conducted without first having a permit.
But it also happens frequently that someone builds without this permit, right? What can they do in such a situation? Can they request a permit right after they already built their property?
Yes, they can request it, but of course, if you're beginning to build without the permit, you carry the risk that you might have to demolish the building afterwards if the permit is not given.
Yeah.
The permit must be submitted in writing. After this permit is submitted, the Minister of Public Works has 6 weeks to answer. After that, this period can be prolonged with another 6 weeks, depending on the complexity of the case. And if within 12 weeks no answer is given, the person requesting the permit can go into appeal.
And what happens after appeal?
The appeal process is mostly for the minister to give reasoning behind why the refusal is given. This appeal process can also go through court. And then obviously when the court gives a final decision, this decision is binding, and then you have a yes or a no.
Okay. What are some important considerations for drafting and negotiating commercial leases in Aruba?
Commercial leases should clearly outline the agreed amount that should be paid. It should outline the duration of the lease. It should outline the renewal options and the permissible uses of the premise. I think these are the key aspects of any lease contract.
Are there like specific clauses that a tenant or a landlord should be aware of when going into the lease agreement? Clauses that may be of importance for them to be protected?
When it comes to tenants, it's important to know and be mindful of the maintenance clauses. What kind of maintenance is required from the tenants? Usually the small-scale maintenances are for the tenant, and then the landlords usually carry the bigger maintenance, like, for example, if there has to be work done with the building itself, painting, that kind of work is usually for the landlord. But it's very important as a tenant to know what responsibilities you carry for the building. For landlords, the use clauses are very important, especially, again, when we're talking about the zones. Is it a commercial zone? Is it an area where you can exploit, for example, a business? Or is it an area where only houses can be built? So it's important to clarify what the use of the property can be in that zone.
And that has to be stipulated in the lease agreement.
Exactly.
What are the legal challenges that developers in Aruba face regarding construction?
I think securing permits is one part that sometimes is very lengthy. As I mentioned, they have 6 weeks to answer. Also, the zoning laws, again, knowing where you can build what. We have the environmental regulations. And I think one topic that is a hot topic right now is the fact that in Aruba we have land scarcity. Because Aruba is such a small island, so we know that the more scarce the land becomes, the more expensive it will become. So that's one challenge we're facing right now.
So, Kiara, we already discussed a little bit about the zoning laws and how they impact residential use of the property, but how does it impact developers, for bigger projects?
Projects must demonstrate that they will have minimum impact on Aruba's nature, especially when it comes to waste and water usage.
So, Kiara, are there any recent changes in environmental laws that the investors should be aware of for their projects?
Again, the ROPV, the spatial development plans, continuously changes. So it's important to keep in mind that, of course, there's advancements in this law. So keep up to date with this.
What advice would you give to someone considering investing in real estate in Aruba? Are there any legal pitfalls they should be aware of?
I think we covered most of them today. But of course, if they have any questions, I would, of course, recommend to come to us, Kloes, Kock Partners, and we can give them further advice and revise the contracts before going into them.
Kiara, where can we find you or learn more about you if we have clients, buyers, or sellers, or just anyone interested to learn more or to be assessed by you?
So you can find us on Google, kloeslawyers.com, and we're located at LG Smith 22, right across from Linear Park, the red, blue, and white building.
Okay, thank you for all the information you provided to us today. One last question that I had was if there are any upcoming real estate laws or laws that implicate this, this field that our clients should be aware of, anything coming up that, that we can share already?
Aruba continuously updates their environmental laws and regulations, especially as sustainability becomes more and more important, like with the scarcity of land, as we mentioned before. So it's important to keep up to date with these laws that are ever changing.
Are there any particular source where people can look up for these updates?
So you can go on gobiernoaruba.awa and that's where they post all of the laws and legislations.
Thank you, Kiara. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Power of Both Living. I don't know, Kiara, if you have a final thought or anything else that you want to share with us, but otherwise, we're just grateful that you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope we get an opportunity to do this again sometime soon.
Thank you, Kiara, and thank you.